Look at that!
I'm going to make a video about this movie online so that people can see that it's not just me who likes this movie, it's you too.
Oh no, pull with the swing.
Yeah, he's crashing.
Huh, it's back on a rope.
Oh no!
Oh
Oh no! Not
Who do you
good.
think's gonna win?
no. With that swing.
Yeah?
What with the flying?
He's so cool.
It's flying.
Yeah. Yeah, he's flying. You know what he says?
I think so.
Ka-chow?
Yeah. With this
Can you say ka-chow?
it's out.
They're made in this beautiful way where they can entertain both adults and children. And that is not an easy thing to do because a lot of the kids' stuff that my son watches is stuff that I don't engage with. I don't want to have anything to do with. So I did try to steer him for a while back towards Cars, which was something he was interested in, rather than this other film because it was more engaging for me. Although I'd watched the first one, I hadn't actually watched the other two. So they were new to me as well, with the familiar characters, but new to me. So I ended up watching them a bit in pieces too, the second one in particular. So it took me a while before I'd actually sort of worked out what the whole story was the whole way through because I wasn't paying attention the whole way through. I wasn't sitting down because you might just watch a little bit at a time and then he'll watch a little bit later or something like that. So
I know you're a big fan of like the Lord of the Rings movies and will watch those when you're feeling ill or something just for comfort.
I have a bit of a thing too that I love new characters, new plots, new everything, but I also find it very overwhelming and overstimulating at this point, especially as a parent and as someone who's got a lot going on. So I tend to go back to old things that I'm comfortable with, but then if it's something that I've watched too much, it's not stimulating enough.
Yeah.
So that could be a neurodivergent thing as well. So I want to watch something that I haven't seen for quite a period of time that's comfortable enough that I know what's going on but stimulating enough because I haven't seen it for a while.
Right.
You have to learn to love kids' movies. You can't be like, oh, not this one again. You have to get into it because otherwise you'll go mad. When like Encanto came out in particular, I was more a fan of it than my son was. So I was putting it on at every chance I got and he's like, no, I don't want to watch this. I want to watch Frozen again. So he's off all of that at the moment and mostly on the Pixar.
Yeah.
Anything with vehicles, cars, planes, anything involving rescuing essentially has been the phase for the last 12 months.
I was sitting with him yesterday. He wanted to watch the Spanish Matador one 3-4 times in a row. I know there's a lot of like low quality or like actually kind of harmful kids entertainment out there. Is like when he chooses to watch a Disney or a Pixar thing like a relief?
It's nice for him to choose something that's got a structure of story because I love storytelling. So a lot of the stuff he prefers to watch is even just kids on YouTube playing with toys. You know, when we sit down and watch something that's a story, that's nice. And I remember my birthday last year, we were in lockdown and he agreed to sit down and watch one of my favourite childhood movies and I can't actually remember what that movie was right now. If I make an event of it, if I say, this is a thing we're going to do, this is the structure of our day, we're going to do this, then he'll be willing to participate. If it's just we're turning the TV on because we need to get some cleaning done or because it's 5:30 in the morning, which is when he wakes up and we're not awake yet, or also because he's neurodivergent, he uses it to calm down. So when he's overstimulated, so having the TV on is a way to at least slow his movements down a bit and help to regulate his emotions. But he does engage with the stories. Like sometimes we'll be watching Cars, you know, and Lightning McQueen will crash his car and it'll be like, oh no. He is paying attention to what's going on. Yeah, but there's, I suppose, some of the other films, it's been interesting that he's just not taken to them at all. Monsters, Inc. It's just been of no interest to him. I think Frozen he really took to because it was very blue.
Right.
Yeah, but he did then for a while really take to Frozen 2.
I haven't seen Frozen 2 yet.
It's not as blue. It's not as blue. It's not as Frozen.
Yes.
It's more greeny, I think.
I know that Olaf dies in Frozen 2.
I was going to say, though, on the blue topic,
Yeah.
interestingly, he didn't take to Finding Nemo in the same way he
Interesting.
took to Frozen.
Right.
So I think he was interested at first, and then he got over it. There's something about the fish wasn't as engaging to him as people.
In the episode that this is going, and I'm talking about both of the Finding Nemo movies, and I remember when we were younger, I would watch Nemo again and again and again.
It was your favourite film.
Yeah, I think.
And it was
Saturday and
every
Sunday.
weekend.
Every
It was
weekend.
very tiring.
I think I was maybe 7 or 8 at the time, and Austin was a bit younger than that.
Yeah, because you were old enough to be choosing that every week. He did like the Dory one more than Nemo.
Right.
I don't know why.
Well, that's Dory is another character that I wanted to speak to you about.
Yeah.
As a disabled person who has also developed a lot of your own disabled sort of stories and has more connections to that community than I do. Like with Nemo having his fin, or with Dory having the short-term memory loss, and then most of the characters in Finding Dory as well that she knows have some kind of disability. Does that resonate with you or mean anything to you?
It wasn't something I particularly picked up on as a kid. Perhaps that would be more true so to disabled kids who have different bodies. Dory, I suppose I can identify with a bit more because Dory has memory problems and also that she's an adult. But I probably didn't pick up on that as a kid. The concept of a fish having short-term memory isn't a new concept. It's a trope, really. So they were playing off a trope that was familiar even as a kid. But I do find the way, just reflecting now, and it has been a little while since I've watched the film, the way that in Finding Nemo that Nemo is portrayed is very positive, I think. You know, he might have had a short fin, but, you know, he was small, so there were things he could do that the other fish couldn't do. And without him, they weren't able to, you know,
Clog the tank,
which then didn't matter in the end anyway.
No.
But then, you know, he was smart enough to get all the fish to go down, was convinced that he could do it. And eventually, you know, his dad believed he could, and that's what made the difference. So his conviction and being told constantly that you can't do something because you're different. And sometimes it can be true, there are things you can't do because you're different. Like, you know, I'm not going to be able to climb Mount Everest, and I'm quite aware of that. But I need to be able to discover those things for myself. I don't need other people to tell me that. And I know what I can and can't do, and you need to be believed. And you need to let other people let you try. Dory, yes, but also a little bit more tropey in the sense of, you know, once you find your community and something, your disability becomes less apparent.
Right.
You know, you get your memory back, which is not always the case. You can still feel a part of a community without your disability being less apparent.
Yeah.
It's still what it was before, you just belong. So that's, I guess, a little bit more tropey. Dory's optimism is, I guess, interesting because when, you know, nobody wants you and you have a disability and you're lost and all of these things, you can appear optimistic because you don't want to push other people away, but it's really, it doesn't feel like that.
Do you find any of the parent characters in the Pixar movies relatable at all now, more so than when you were a kid? Because I know you're trying to do this cycle breaking thing with your son of disciplining him in a different way than at least we were when we were kids.
Well, even just ignoring the word discipline.
Yeah.
I think we raised kids for generations on this idea that they had to behave instead of that they had to become people, and that it's not actually about behaving. And it's weird, I go back to the Bible on this and the children behaving in a certain way and Jesus saying, no, the kingdom belongs to people such as these. And whether or not you're a Christian, I think that's something that should stick with you, that children are a part of the community and that everybody's responsibility, if you want to be a part of the community. If you don't, you can go live in a jungle. If you want to be a part of the community, it's not just, you know, make your children behave, and if you can't, you should stay at home, because that's not inclusive of children or of parents, especially mothers, because they're the ones who are generally isolated. So I guess I can understand Marlon's fear if we're still talking about Nemo.
Well, just in general, but yeah.
He's been through a traumatic event that he hasn't had to process properly, and he has, this child who is disabled and is his only connection left to the rest of his children and his wife and his past life, and that can be quite terrifying, and it takes a while to learn to let go a little bit, and as a parent you constantly letting go a little bit and a little bit at a time, so
I think there's a lot of that across Pixar and in a lot of their movies. Like Mr. Incredible had trouble holding on, and he was constantly letting go too much, and then in Turning Red it's about, from the kid's perspective at least, the mum is holding too tight. So there's a lot of that going on. Like the child-parent relationship. I've never been a parent, so I've never had to assess it from the other side.
The Incredibles is a good example, because you've got Mr. Incredible who's incredibly dissatisfied in his work life, and that's affecting his mental health and his sense of self, and it in turn impacts on his family. There's no doubt that Elastigirl's inability to be Elastigirl is also impacting on her sense of self, but she's a mum and she's just got to keep going, and the less that he does to support the family, the more she's got to pick up his slack. And so I feel her frustration, because there are so many parents out there with partners who wanted this life, wanted to have kids together, and are not doing their share. And I don't have a partner like that. I have a good partner, but there's still moments where I'm like, these are things you haven't had to think about. These are things that you haven't thought that you'd need to think about. Yeah, so I definitely can feel Elastigirl's frustration. And I suppose in the second movie she gets her chance to have her life a little bit, and she's worried about the kids. She's worried that he can't handle them, and I think she's justified in worrying he can't handle them, because he hasn't proven to her at that point that he can handle them on his own, and then he's got to step up and be macho dad, and he's exhausted. Whereas he's doing the same thing that she was doing. It's just the baby's now on fire and everything. But Inside Out is an interesting one too, because there's that moment at the dinner table where the mum asks for some help because the daughter's struggling, and she's struggling because she's had this huge life change. She's emotional. She needs emotional support, and the parents have just not been there to support her emotionally. And she's an only child, so really they should be doing better. I know there's a lot going on in their life, but she's an only child. And then she asks for help, and the dad goes, okay, discipline mode. Instead of, this child is struggling emotionally, let's be there for emotional support. And we know it's the wrong thing. It's so wrong. It just doesn't make any sense. But I suppose that's what we mean about breaking the cycle in terms of how we're raising kids. It's not... discipline, a lot of disciplining is just ignoring your child's confusion and your child's emotions, because they're behaving a certain way for a certain reason, and you've got to discover the reason for that. And that's easier when you have one child than when you have four, because it's a very, very tiring way of parenting. It is hard, and it takes a lot out of us as parents, because we've had to learn how to regulate our own emotions, because we weren't really taught that, and now to teach our child how to regulate theirs. And when you just don't have enough time to do it for 4 kids properly, you just don't. So you have to parent differently, and every child needs to be parented differently and all that. So, but I definitely feel that moment in Inside Out when the dad goes, go to your room. And I was like, that is not helpful. That is not addressing the problem. But of course, for a story arc, she wouldn't want to get on that bus, would she, if she was happy, or if she was feeling supported. And then at the end, when everybody sits down and has a cry together, and then we learn that you can be happy in sad moments because your emotions are being supported together, and that's a really heartfelt moment at the end there, when we're mixing happy with sad for core memories. Recognise that, and that's what I mean when I come back to how you can watch it as an adult and as a kid and get something out of it.
I could still race.
Oh no, not then.
I hope that conversation with my sibling Ray was able to help re-inject some reality into this series of film reviews I'm doing and sort of open the lens up again. YouTube and perspective videos can sometimes be, especially when an opinionated person like myself is practiced at giving a singular point of view, really easy to kind of see as being quite reductive in the grand scheme of the movie industry. They can lose sight on what the product is actually for, and that can be a little bit harmful. I know it's well within my power to obscure in my commentary the things that make my points seem less potent. Things like, a 3-year-old loves that bit, and that probably makes it worth it, but that's not in the spirit of my channel. These movies are for everybody. Quite literally, in a way, few artistic projects get to be. Pixar films are given time and teams and money and attention to make sure the most amount of people across the face of the planet can watch, enjoy, and get something out of them. I found it, as I always do, foundationally important to embed a reminder of the obligations the work I'm speaking about has at some point in these videos that I'm doing. They're not tailor-made to stand up to the kind of scrutiny that I'm offering. They're built to offer entertainment and enrichment to all sorts of people who can enjoy and consume them in many, many, many different ways. The things that I value about movies are not even necessarily things the teams developing these films need to consider. For me, it took someone else letting me know and using the actual word to remind me that I'm pretty much a purist with how I consume media. It might seem obvious to everybody else, but I listen to full albums. I watch movies, hopefully, in one sitting with my phone on the other side of the room with nobody fucking talking, and give it my undivided attention. I like to take the artist's intention into account and give their work my undivided space within a near dedicated, purpose-built room designed to make the movie the focus of my activity. I have a big fuck off TV. I prefer to watch on physical media discs. I'm very passionate about sound and fidelity, but that is a luxury. This is stuff that I really, really care about, and the process and environment of consuming each film or game or show or album in a way that brings me the most pleasure is a really important space for me to cultivate, but I can't force that perspective on anybody else. It just might not be how they like to live their life. This is to speak not only to the breadth of opinions about how good any Pixar movie is, given just how popular they are, but also to the vast range of ways in which they can be experienced at all. It's just a reminder of the reality. We're here to have fun, but at the end of it, you enjoy the movies you want in the way that you want, and Pixar are there for you in any way that might be, and at the very end of the day, these are all just movies. We might tie our emotional connections to like really important moments in our lives to them, but they are just movies. And it's this long-winded, distracting light show of a qualifier that might help me get away with putting Finding Nemo in the number 12 spot. By now we're in the thick of things, and it's starting to really matter how I'm watching these movies and what I'm seeking from them. I want them to be beyond the Pixar threshold. I want them to lift me out of the rut of world logic and nitpicks into letting it all go and being more concerned with the wider, deeper narrative that they're speaking to. I want a great movie experience. I want to forget where the hell I am. As an introduction, I think the 3 films we're talking about today in the bracket really do achieve that. I'm not concerned about asking the dead-end questions about how do cars give birth or whether fish actually have teeth, which is all in good fun, but I'm finding myself far more able to just deal with it, put it to the side, and just enjoy the story. I crossed the Pixar threshold into something bigger. In addition to that, these are 3 movies which boast a very clear uniting element in their construction to me, and that's their command of editing, timing, and rhythm. All 3 of these movies have a flow and an atmosphere afforded to them by their editing that feels musical and memorable. I think it's a really shining aspect of each. One of them is a love letter to a great many things like racing and the American countryside, but also has a deep love of music alongside. The other 2, both Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, were helmed by Andrew Stanton, who in particular as an animation director, I think, has done some work with Pixar in their earlier years which really helped them reach the stratosphere thanks to his attention to editing and atmosphere. How that really has polished off the rough edges within the Pixar chronology is something that I think he really brought to the table. Now, given my need to respect copyright when creating these videos, it's really difficult for me to show off that editing aspect of the movies myself. And frankly, because it applies to the entire hour and a half runtime, it's more something you'll feel if you sit down to watch them again. But I sure can talk about it, I think it's a core defining element which gives all three of these movies a spark that can feel so addictive and energetic. They're each highly impressive visual works with engaging emotional arcs and showcase a deep love for their settings and characters in an enveloping way which invites me into their worlds and stories, but the capstone on their humor, their emotional beats, their entertaining writing is undoubtedly the supreme hold they each have on editing, on the ebb and flow of the film. It's the rhythm of these pieces which helps elevate them and me as a viewer into something bigger than they at first present. That's a very long introduction and basically another video essay before we get to the reviews. My apologies about that, but now let's talk about them individually. Ciao! Lightning McQueen is a rookie race car in his first year of professional competition, and he's quickly demolished all expectations and risen into the top of the order to get a legitimate shot at becoming the first rookie racer to win the Piston Cup, which would be a legendary achievement if he can make it happen. He's competing against the career runner-up Chick Hicks, a nasty driver who already causes a huge crash during the first race, and the King, a class act veteran who's basically in his final year. However, McQueen still has some maturing left to do, and while putting on a front of a lone wolf one-man show has done wonders for his popularity, his hot-headedness costs him on the final stretch of the race where two of his back tires blow and he ends up in a three-way tie for the cup. On the way to the championship decider race to be held in a week, he loses his pit crew, shows some classless contempt for his Rust-Ease sponsors, and pressures his driver to drive while drowsy to get to California as fast as possible. McQueen is lost during transit, and while trying to find his driver Mac again, takes a wrong turn on the interstate of Route 66. He mistakes a cop to be shooting at him, and in the panic of upholding his belief in ACAB, he causes a series of traffic accidents and destroys the central road of an entire fucking town somehow. He's apprehended, and when the doc of the town sentences him to community service to replace the road, he slowly gets to know the people of Radiator Springs. Meta, Luigi, and Guido, and even starts falling for a former lawyer Porsche named Sally. Sally tells McQueen about the town's long and storied history on Route 66, a formerly major road which has been made redundant by the interstate highway, and McQueen begins to understand he might be able to fill the hole in his fast-paced life with this kind of slow, intentional living. He discovers that the Doc was formerly a legendary race car, the Hudson Hornet, with 3 Piston Cup victories under his belts. But after being rejected by the racing scene after a big crash, Doc's memories of his former life have been poisoned. Doc eventually calls some paparazzi to get McQueen out of town and speed him on his way to his race in California. Conflicted about what he's learned in the past week and distracted by the emotional whiplash, McQueen is surprised when all his new friends from Radiator Springs arrive at the race, including Doc, who agrees to be his new pit chief. McQueen has a shot at winning the Piston Cup, but Chick Hicks causes the King to spin out and crash. McQueen, seeing the opportunity to save the King from a better fate than Doc Hudson and live his life in a more fulfilling way, gives up the victory before he finishes so he can push the King to the finish line. The film ends with McQueen electing to stay with the Rust-Ease crew, the people who believed in him and gave him his big break, in order to start living as an honest car who knows when he's got a good thing going. So, I ranked these films personally in early 2021 after my initial sessions of watching the entire Pixar category all in a row, while recovering from a surgery. And while I am rewatching them to write about them now, I'm trying to trust my original deliberations and not mess with the order too much. Approaching Cars, I expected that I might need to unveil one of the 2 trap cards that I've had placed down on the field this entire time, the Nostalgia card, in order to justify its placement above specifically Monsters Inc. The Nostalgia card is a one-time use card, which allows me to, for only one film, use my own personal fondness for the movie as a child as a plain-faced excuse to enjoy it more than a film I think is better made. But watching it again, I think I'm gonna keep this trap card right where it is until I actually need it. I'm surprised at how good my original rankings are. Turns out, I have really good opinions, and I often agree with myself, even 2 years later. That's fun and affirming. I'm good. Cars isn't just a movie I like because I watched it a lot as a kid, although it certainly was a DVD that I played many times. I do just also think it is just a better movie than any I've spoken about so far, and it's definitely a stronger feature than I can often see it get credit for. Weirdly, and I hope you'll forgive the jump that this requires, but in this day and age, I kind of think of Cars as being the John Denver of Pixar movies. It has all the technical prowess, it's clear and it's bright and it's soulful and it's beloved for its charm. Just like the live at Universal recording of Thank God I'm a Country Boy, it simply has the best vibes imaginable. Its ever-glowing personality shines through, maybe specifically amidst otherwise dour company during times of adversity. In the same way that John Denver brought good times, he did so during a time of war and trouble for his country. To hear his songs, you'd never know he was performing at the same time as Jimi Hendrix. Denver's music absolutely feels out of time with so much of what was happening around the world as like a reprieve, and Cars feels that same way to me. While in shirking the more grown-up sides of life that country music or Pixar movies like to explore, Denver and Cars still came with a reverence and an earnestness which didn't try to hide the bad sides of life. They simply chose to focus on something else and seemed to choose to stay within the realm of entertainment, graciously allowing an excellent kind of reprieve from the difficult conversations for an hour or two while still providing a sense of emotional resonance and a homely touch. What I mean is Cars is not a sad, dour movie, but it still says something important. It's an emotionally intelligent film, still retains a sense of sensitivity and emotional wholeness. There's just an entire sequence about farting tractors as well. I want to talk about Cars visuals for a bit, and obviously I've criticized the age visuals of some previous Pixar works like Monsters Inc. and A Bug's Life before. I have a lot of understanding for the technological limitations of the time and how these were still enormously impressive, truly groundbreaking works, but I'm still allowed to not like the way the movies look today. And sometimes that's because they're old, because old 3D animation and old 2D animation, they just don't age the same. I can watch the old original 1930s Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and the thing still looks unspeakably perfect nearly 100 years later, because 2D animation ages so differently from 3D. For 3D, yes, some grace is needed, but I also don't think it's worth denying that early Pixar works look kind of spooky. And while vintage digital certainly is a thing, I mean, look at any PSX reboot, there's a difference between how 2D and 3D animation holds up when the project is 30 years old. It's a facet of the field, and I think it diminishes the advancements made more recently to pretend like older movies have retained visual components or class if they simply don't have it. I don't think it's worth denying when a 3D film looks old, and that it looking old or uneven or empty because of its age, and how that can break the illusion to me sometimes isn't something I'm gonna lie about just because it might seem shallow. It's a visual medium, being concerned with the visuals is a lot of the point. It's important, however, to say that the rule I go by with this stuff is that technology ages, but good designs don't. Good filmmaking doesn't. In the same way that Singin' in the Rain remains spellbinding, good filmmaking is good filmmaking, and I'm not criticizing any Pixar movie for looking old for its own sake. It's about the illusion that they fail to maintain because of their age. The seams that they fail to hide, which is given away by how they've aged. The pencils inside the computer, the drawing implements themselves, don't fill in the gaps as much as they need to for me to buy into it again. But on Cars visuals, now Cars was released after The Incredibles, which was after Finding Nemo. So both of the two prior movies had some extraordinary visuals, which have kept their staying power with their filmmaking choices, in my opinion, till today. But if you're asking me, it's that Cars within the Pixar chronology, with the age specifically of the visuals, starts getting pretty hard to notice. You can see it on distant backgrounds and some water simulation, but in a way that Finding Nemo's humans put a stop to and Incredibles' lighting and materials can sometimes pull up, Cars pretty much still looks like a brand new movie. Not to diminish the advancements made since, but what Pixar achieved with Cars on a visual front was honestly huge, and as a viewer today, I'm surprised at how dazzling it remains as a movie released in 2006. It doesn't look like a film that came out 16 years ago. What I find fascinating, and what we'll be touching on a fair bit today, is how the animation and cinematography work so elegantly around the enormous challenges at even just a premise point of view. Cars, if you're making a movie about cars are reflective, so lighting them and staging scenes with them is going to be so challenging when trying to simulate various environments and then put characters within a scene. How the light sources change the atmosphere of a moment and promote the intention, but also react to the color of each vehicle. How each different bonnet is gonna also reflect light itself. This is a project-defining constraint that cannot be overstated. Animating a cast of entirely reflective characters was likely not even possible
impossible before this point. It's also worth highlighting how strange it must have been to figure out how to scale these environments, like the size of them, and then shoot a car character in the first place with a camera. Getting a film which looks this natural and designing car characters which look like vehicles but giving them faces and mouths and stuff in a way that looks not awful would have been such a line to walk. How do you anthropomorphize a vehicle without having it not look like a car? You don't want it to look cheap or tacky. You need to see physical differences between vehicles. You need to make sure their proportions feel natural as characters but also as vehicles without thinking, oh boy, is a human gonna fit in there? Figuring out how their body language works and how each of them move and drive differently. Getting believable contact. Nailing the look and feel of wheels onto a road in the first place would have been immensely challenging. Like, the environments in an animation thing aren't real. They don't have geography. You can't touch the thing. You can't just drop a car into a 3D world and have it drive around. It's not a game. You need to position the characters at the right point in 3D space on all their axes, and then the feedback from what they're touching down on is shown on their body and the deflation on their wheels. The ground is just like a texture, like a picture that they're floating on top of. They're not actually touching anything. Physical contact of items is apparently something that Pixar really tried to avoid before this point. Like, in a walk cycle, you can cheat and not have the character's feet actually touching the ground if the camera isn't showing their shoes. But the framing and cinematography of Cars means that the whole of the car's body is going to be in the frame, and at all times they're going to be touching the ground. You can't trick the eye using forced perspective or stretching proportions to work with the camera's viewpoint nearly as easily, since they don't have limbs to work with. What are you going to stretch? There's far less room to cheat out of frame here. You need to be showing wheel contact at any point. How'd they get that figured out? And then do dust effects on top? That's wild. We live in a cool world. But also, while each car is a different size and subtly different height, instead of their body going downward like a human's does with their face at the top, you can't just frame their head and shoulders and a conversation from there. You have to frame the car's entire body while still having an environment around them which is sized properly and offers parallax and perspective to the frame at any given point. Figure out how to make it all look natural. Just think of how you'd reshoot any of this in real life. If someone rebuilt radiator springs to scale and then filled it with actual cars, how laborious would it be to get all these cars in these positions? What lenses would you need to choose? How the hell would you place your lights? Never mind that cars are animating their speech with their bonnets and wheels in ways that vehicles can't do. It's the positioning on the roads, how they share the space, their maneuverability throughout each spot, how much area they traverse within any given scene. A lot of these scenes are moving and talking at the same time. How do you convey the speed of that? How the frame guides your eyes and how they look next to each other. It's deceptively complicated, and I think visually, the team on Cars did an absolutely stellar job of creating a strong but expensive and natural feeling visual stamp for a world and a cast of characters that could have gone absolutely disastrously in so many areas. That the film looks as good as it does and has aged as well as it has, do not let that be lost on you. This is an incredible looking movie. Now, turning my attention to the story and the narrative and stuff, potentially it's thanks to having already watched and spoken about both of its sequels, but comparatively, the original Cars just does feel like it does a much better job of utilizing the characters within the world and story, and it just has a much greater depth of intention than either of the follow-up movies. It doesn't feel like it's only trying to do one thing. Yeah, the supporting cast can feel stereotypical or thin. However, I think that same aspect is more evident in the later movies, and most every character here genuinely feels like they are cared for by the storytellers. Those who don't receive as much screen time or aren't as important to the story are still given respect by the characters themselves, because that's what the movie is about. Basically, while there is stereotype at play, it's not for the reasons of punching down or weak caricatures for the most part. I think Flo is definitely the worst offender. The characters are still nice and cool, they're just easy to understand. But in a way perhaps the other Cars films don't necessarily have over Cars 1 is just the layers that it has going on. The film is about a lot of things, and the way it moves between those topics that it chooses to focus on, slowly peeling one layer back before moving on to the next, is paced very, very well, showing off a little of each before wrapping it all back up again in reverse with a different lens. To begin, you've got the basic sports movie story. A rookie with a big ego and a lack of perspective starts getting his comeuppance and learns that he can't be a solo act. The opening action and racing is enjoyable, engaging, making quick work, showing off characters at the same time as becoming entertaining, beginning the narrative. This opening is so strong and so well composed that we basically only stay in this one environment for the whole of the first act of the movie, and look forward to returning to another race for the climax with barely a revisitation to this kind of setting in between. Racing has to make this huge early fully impact. But as the film goes on, fewer and fewer things feel like they're missing when the lack of action is being filled in by other things as we go. The early sound design does a lot of great work here. It's weighty, it's exciting, it's tense, a unique use of music and songs right up top to establish an identity for the film, which feels strong and individual right away. A sports movie, I think, would have been a really natural choice for Pixar at this time. They'd done some work reimagining tried and true formulas like buddy comedies, adventure movies, and the like, so creating an ambitious animated feature based on sports tropes feels like an interesting next step, and racing is a particularly good choice. And furthermore, giving a level of earnestness that's definitely important. Cars loves racing. It really does feel like the filmmakers have paid attention to racing and employed it in a way which helps those unfamiliar with it understand what's exciting about it, but potentially racing fans might enjoy in a slightly deeper way. Cameos from real legendary racers and understanding of identity and loyalty as a fan of the sport. I mean, I used to work with a guy who loves racing, massive Ferrari Formula 1 dude, and he loved this movie because of how it felt like a love letter to the sport that he enjoys. That's really worth something to the right people, and for everybody else has definitely acted as a gateway for potentially millions of people. After that, the next layer, we get to the part of the film which loves small town America. The long drives, the landscape, the small businesses, honest folk who care about one another. Having the clash of the film demonstrated in characters is a great way to do it. McQueen represents something. He embodies the spirit that's been ignoring Radiator Springs, the very thing that has meant their town's fading promise. Yet their spirit extends to him also in the form of Micah, who represents Radiator Springs' passion and uncynical acceptance of all people. It's a really clear and heartfelt way to craft a story about two separate things that seem incompatible and figure out a way to get them to work together by mirroring the larger struggle of economic comment that Cars is making with the emotional needs of its hero. I mean, the film chooses to play up McQueen's loneliness during the Life is a Highway montage where you see all the straight lines cutting through the curves of the world. That's a great moment to do it. And a lot of this message of the film comes through the characters, not just of Doc, but also Sally and Mater filling in the parts of McQueen that he can't find, and that's reinforced by the world. So everything kind of, it's a figure eight. The characters lead to the world, which leads back to the characters, which makes this layer really, really emotionally engaging. I have no idea why Sally got sidelined so hard for the next few movies when she's a pretty major focus here and quite a well-played character. Mater is at his most endearing here in this movie for sure. Truly, he's got so much energy. I'm really glad that Larry the Cable Guy was able to give so much of his real brand to this character, so much of himself. I hope his heartburn is doing okay as well. There's some really clever jokes in this part of the movie here too. Hey, this might not be a good time right now, but you owe me $32,000 in legal fees.
Oh, honey, look, surplus.
Honey, we have too much surplus.
The oil company's got a grip on the government. They're feeding us a bunch of lies, man.
Wait, ding, ding, ding! Make sure somebody ring the woke bell. Fillmore's pretty woke. Did you know Doc is a famous race car? He won a piston cup.
He did what in his car?
However, when things in the movie get a little sexual or toilet humor adjacent, it can feel a little crass or childish in a way that doesn't super fit that well to me from the adult perspective I have now, but I do remember as a kid enjoying the tractor tipping sequence, so you know, different strokes. The opening scene of Sally doing lawyer stuff and McQueen being extremely forward isn't the best signifier of where these two characters go, with the Sally and McQueen drive eventually becoming one of the strongest points of the movie in my opinion, and a really lovely and unexpected moment of editing prowess. The escalation into the music is paced beautifully, using some light jokes to work up into a soft escalation, and the discussion that Sally and McQueen have at the wheel well about the town itself feels like McQueen's real growing moment. Specifically, when he asks, "Were you rich?" and Sally is like, "What?" is the exact moment I think he learns to stop pretending. This moment isn't about you, man. Your friend is trying to talk to you and you just have to listen right now. That's what she needs. Stop asking silly questions. It's a really interesting thing that I hadn't noticed as a kid, that McQueen's arc and growth is shown through him eventually driving the scenes less and less as the main character. Stepping back, asking more questions, letting other people talk instead of dominating. It's a very effective writing tool and something that I might try personally in some point in the future. A change can be shown by slowly taking things away as much as changing things that are already there. Specifically, McQueen's flaw includes the lack of attention that he pays to people, so to show him learning to listen to Sally here is a moment I really enjoy. His arc is solidified by having him talk less. Taking things away signifies growth. Then the Sally drive moves on to a favorite John Lasseter kind of signature montage where the lyrics of the song that is playing, Our Town by James Taylor in this instance, tells the same story that the visuals are telling in a very on-the-nose fashion that I go back and forth on depending on the day. It's done a couple of times in the original Toy Story with like the strange things that happen to me. Fucking obviously I'm not getting on a bird again. And it's kind of an old hat device, I think, like an indecisive musical number. I'll address it more for the Toy Story because I feel it's more a problem there. But here in Cars, it feels natural, like a good grounding moment, and it doesn't take too long either. Given how the film has already frequently featured more contemporary songs, it's a lot less jarring than it happens to be in Toy Story, and it specifically being James Taylor is sure to have won some hearts. The sequence crystallizes the plight of towns on Route 66, as I understand it, an important place of American road history as one of the country's original highways. Actual Route 66 historian Michael Wallace was an early creative consultant on the project, giving the moment the time and space to breathe about something that happened to a great many towns across the state as the road infrastructure of the US changed and annulled kind of the economics of their towns. Not only works emotionally, but feels like an important thing to speak about and adds yet another layer of levels to the many that Cars is already playing on. You've got a sports story, you've got motorsport specific racing and excitement, you've got a little bit of a love story, you've got something about not being judgmental, you've got something about classism and class divides, you've got something about the history of roads and the way society shapes itself around travel and the notion of journeys in general. There's a lot going on in this movie. An argument is sometimes made for a very focused film doing one thing very, very well, like Onward does. But Cars is a film which I feel a whole crowd of people might enjoy or connect with for entirely different reasons apiece because the film does so many different things so well. The appeal is in a lot of places and nothing conflicts with each other. You've got a 3-year-old nephew who likes the jokes and the characters and the racing for every genuine car and road history enthusiast. All this fluidity and careful composure of atmosphere is some of Pixar's editing magic, bringing all of this together and making sure none of these layers conflict with each other or cut the other one off at an inopportune time unless that's intended. The film remains tight and engaging while it feels breezy and light, which is crystallized with the abrupt return to the racing world, muscles its way back into the frame, and the excitement, this thing that we've been looking forward to, which acted as a hook to begin with, is given an unexpected emotional sting. I quite like Cars. I think it's a very solid film, which may have just been easy to understand and a little less imaginative in terms of its premise and appeal than Pixar had become known for at the time, but that never meant it wasn't extremely well executed. And for my money, there's a lot more going on in the movie than I used to be able to see, but it's still made very easy to consume. It plays each of its appealing factors in a very balanced way, which helps it connect to a wide array of people from a lot of different angles, and brings them all together with a visual approach that feels extremely refined even to this day. It plays timeless aspects of storytelling and feels like a genuine classic to me. And because of the careful balance of action and comedy with a heartfelt, earnest tone about things that are worth caring about, the story feels like it comes from a place of love, many places of love. Love for racing, love for the American countryside, small town USA, love for what makes people connect over shared interests or trials and finding camaraderie in unlikely places. That where this film comes from, I don't feel in either of the other two Cars entries, really. Cars is quite easily the best of the three of its franchise to me, given that emotional bent, and its balanced editing, giving the whole movie a rhythm and a groove that feels as fresh today as the day it released. And it's not a strength that every Lasseter Pixar film boasts. Often he's dragging his feet in sequences, but this movie just whole 90 minutes just comes together so well. Every sequence rolls into the next one beautifully. There's probably no way so many emotional balls could be juggled so well and so vigorously unless the timing and editing of this movie was as tight as it is.
I just woke up. I just got out of bed. Alright, it's me, Mr. Always doing a controversial take. Mr. Doesn't know how to agree with consensus. Mr. Thinks Finding Dory is probably better than Monsters U and Incredibles 2 and is a pretty good movie. I'll take the heat, it's fine. Let me have it. I get it. This is a complicated movie, but to summarize the story as best I can, Nemo and Marlin are home and Dory is now part of their family, living in what remains of the absolutely thriving Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, since Pauline Hanson and Adani presumably don't exist in this world, and I think that means it's automatically a better timeline than ours. Anyway, this story is pretty complicated, so cut me some damn slack for this one, alright? I just woke up and my voice is like so low right now. I got sleepy voice, is real sexy. Dory has a flashback to her parents and remembers that she'd spent quite some time looking for them before meeting Marlin. She doesn't remember that much, but what she can piece together leads her, Nemo, and Marlin all the way to California to the Marine Life Institute, a kind of hospital slash aquarium for sea creatures where she grew up before being separated from her parents somehow. When she's separated from Marlin and Nemo, she teams up with Hank, a grumpy old octopus who wants to be alone, her old friend Destiny, the nearsighted whale shark, and Bailey, a beluga whale, inside the institute because she grew up here. She's been here before. She begins navigating her way around the exhibit to where she believed her parents still to be, gradually piecing together what small memories she has of them, like their names, certain phrases or locations attached to them. Marlin, who's been a bit intolerant of Dory's memory problems so far, and Nemo attempt to locate her inside the institute, and Nemo reminds Marlin that he needs to be more trusting of Dory instead of treating her like a useless, careless fish. Dory finds her old childhood home inside one of the exhibits and recalls how she was pulled into an undertow current and was lost out at sea. Dory becomes lost in the pipe system but is found by Nemo and Marlin, who apologizes and affirms how helpful she's been to everyone she encounters, and finally thanks her properly for the presence that she's had in his life. Along with Hank, they then find the rest of the blue tang fish who are about to be moved to a different aquarium. They tell Dory her parents escaped years ago to look for her and are presumably dead. In the confusion of an institute employee catching Hank the octopus but dropping Dory, she falls into the ocean while Nemo and Marlin are locked in with the blue tang on a truck heading for a different aquarium. In Cleveland, somewhere very inland, I think. Lost alone in the ocean, Dory finds a line of shells leading somewhere, a little ritual that her parents had taught her to help her find her way back home when she was a kid. Turns out her parents had stayed near the institute in case she returned, and they reunite. She then remembers that Nemo and Marlin still need help. Action gets dialed up to 10 from there on. Suffice to say that Hank drives a car, Louis Armstrong sings a song, and everybody, including Hank and Destiny and Bailey, end up back on the Great Barrier Reef, one big happy family, while Dory and Marlin look out on the unforgettable view. Right, so I don't think Finding Dory is that popular of a Pixar movie, at least not in like the circles of people who discuss this really seriously. But in practice, I think Coco is probably the platonic ideal of a Pixar movie, the one that best captures the things that they're often shooting for, like family and music and whimsy, stuff like that. But on paper, I think Finding Dory might hit all of the same criteria as well. It's visually astounding, it's narratively hefty, it's beautifully acted, showcasing a grand sense of adventure from a teeny tiny little underdog viewpoint. It's something of a remix on a timeless story from the animation idiom, like a child seeking their lost parents. It's classic Pixar. A gentle ramping up of stakes into the unreal while still keeping an emotional story in the field of vision. It's got something for everybody and some great jokes and characters. It might feel a little tonally strange or cramped, and we'll be getting to that, but Dory kind of does everything that a Pixar movie is pretty much supposed to do. It not only shares a great deal in common with Finding Nemo as a jumping off point, but has a lot in common with several other Pixar sequels as well, like Incredibles 2, Monsters University, and Toy Story 2. Things like a long gap from the original's production, yet its close time proximity to the first movie, switching the perspective character to a supporting character from a previous movie, and a ramping up of stakes into the unreal with a larger cast. Given those similarities, Finding Dory might feel a bit safe conceptually from stepped back, but watching it, Finding Dory very rarely comes across as a movie playing it safe. I actually like this movie a lot because it feels the opposite. Sometimes I talk to people who enjoy movies in spite of their failures or their ambitions, even if they didn't get the whole way.
I'm talking like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, a real movie. That's the best. It's the title, it's the pitch, it's the story, it's everything. so good.
We all have that one guilty pleasure movie we know isn't really all that great, but we still love. I think Guy Ritchie makes nothing but those. Now, I wouldn't quite use that language to describe my relationship with Finding Dory, since I don't think the movie's overtly bad in any real areas, but it's easily been the most difficult film to write about so far from the Pixar catalogue, so I might say that I like this movie because it could have failed in so many areas, and that teetering on the edge kind of risk-taking filmmaking is such a rare feeling in modern Pixar. While I can on one hand understand folks being surprised to Finding Dory's announcement given how well contained Finding Nemo was, I personally never found much worth complaining about in the actual product, and I think it's probably, in the cold light of day, about as good as the original in most ways, and certainly a step up visually, and I think the fact that people have had these years in between to have a relationship with Finding Nemo might sort of blind people to how similar these two movies really are in how they go about what they do. It's moved on from the thin layer of Australian calling cards, and Dory is probably the more humorous of the two, but it also has similar strengths in terms of substance, and I think if Finding Dory had been produced quickly after Nemo, it wouldn't be held to anywhere near the same kind of judgment that I think it is. There's the idea born from the time in between that it needs to try to revive something, needs to be a revisitation to the same flavor as Finding Nemo, but the switch in the central character was met with a similar pivot in the tonal and filmmaking lens, which I really think only makes sense, and really is as good a reason as any that you could ask for the feeling of this movie just being a bit different from the first in a lot of ways. It has a very similar road trip construction to Nemo. While Nemo in his original movie was less emphasized and was basically rooted to one spot, while Marlin and Dory moved through various places, Finding Dory presents constant movement within both stories. And while most of it does take place within the Marine Life Institute at large, it feels much less strictly bound to any single room or location. This constant movement means the film can be at times difficult to grab a really good hold of. It doesn't slow down all that often, and when it does, it loses a sense of real, actual calm because those moments happen rarely inside spaces that we feel comfortable in. Because the amount of characters that both Dory and Marlin meet in their separate adventures, how quickly the film moves along, and how rarely it lets up off the gas, particularly in its first half, Finding Dory feels a bit frenetic, a bit disjointed, and a bit hard to follow. But I really do try not to let the overwhelming nature of a really stuffed full movie get the better of me, and I would encourage you to do the same, specifically for Pixar because these movies are built to last. They're there for multiple viewings, catch the details again and again, and the more times I watch Dory, the more I am finding things to enjoy. I think because the amount of times that I've seen Finding Nemo, I needed to go back and let Finding Dory sort of grow on me a bit because I have such a particular kind of connection to Finding Nemo from my childhood. I needed to give Finding Dory more space. It's certainly taken me a few viewings, including one with the commentary and a deep dive on research and stuff, to feel like I have a solid grasp on this movie's trajectory and its arc and what its movement actually is, because it's very easy to just get swept up in the energy and adventure of it all and forget to take tabs on the more subtle character work going on. Finding Nemo is similarly frenetic. I've just seen it a whole bunch of times and gotten used to how it feels. Now, Finding Dory feels to me, now that I've had some time with it, like a remarkably ambitious Pixar movie for a lot of reasons, just as it feels like a fat piece of steak for any viewer to jump into. This was a real state-of-the-art project at the time visually, but to also revive a beloved original with some of Pixar's most everlasting characters, and then the story of this movie itself feels like it would have been a nightmare to wrap the team's head around at virtually any stage of the project. There is so much going on in this movie, and a lot that seems like it was left behind. The way the movie plays in a script, the editing room, the organization of which scenes to give to which animators, bringing all this disparate stuff together into a cohesive project, dealing with some of the most challenging visual material and some singular writing challenges as well. This is a story which could potentially, and I'm guessing often did, spiral well out of hand for millions of reasons. So here's the thing. I'm aware that Finding Dory is probably not a more cohesive, whole, or compelling movie than Cars or Monsters Inc. Cars certainly has fewer problems for one, but just the sheer force of will that this movie gives off is something I find so
refreshing for Pixar, and weirdly, sometimes watching them struggle to get there is as enjoyable and engaging as watching them rock out to me. I've sometimes praised their movies and will continue to do so for the feeling of effortlessness, the way they make it look so easy. But Finding Dory is a film that feels at all times the same way Toy Story 3 does, like everybody had to dig extremely deep, knuckle down, and work to make happen, test their strengths and go extremely hard to wrestle this goddamn thing into line. This is not an effortless movie. This is a feat, and to me that feels fun as a point of difference as a member in the audience from a lot of the movies they've made. I watch Finding Dory when I want to see the world's best go toe to toe with a fucking challenge. And as we get further into my biases, we continue seeing how which Pixar film someone gravitates toward tells you more about the viewer than the movie, and personally I don't value a competent movie more than an interesting one. Cars is a more successful film internally speaking, but I also respect movies that are going for riskier, more complicated things. And right from the start, I think Finding Dory is a harder trick to nail with basically every component than a lot of stuff Pixar have made. On top of the technical prowess on show, the boldness makes this a better, more engaging, more involving watch to me. It just asks more of me. Because it's got that wildly spread story, but it also just isn't content to let adventure be the point. The force of will comes from getting the movie sorted out, while it also aims for an emotionally complex point. Getting Dory from a sidekick to a main character and trying to speak to the worth of accessibility for disabled people in an animated caper. The nature of accessibility in the structures which can aid people as they go about their lives, but also the decisions and attitudes within people that can obstruct and also help disabled people find and accept themselves and their abilities and navigate their lives is the call of the day. And I enjoy Finding Dory for not backing down from the insane visual challenges here while electing to tell a story that's also necessary and important. I hope you can understand why the attempt at such a project is worth valuing for the size of that task alone. The fundamental challenges facing this movie, the things you need to find good solutions for, are Dory's short-term memory loss, an immense writing hurdle, which is interesting to watch the team navigate, how to move her around the human world, which they developed Hank the Octopus largely to help with, the most complicated character to animate in Pixar's history at the time, and to figure out what her character arc actually was, considering she'd been a sidekick in the prior movie and would be central here. Seeing Pixar choose, of all the many stories available to them, choose to go in the direction they did is interesting given how singular these narrative challenges would be to this project. There are entirely different stories with this cast available to them. They decided to leave the Great Barrier Reef, go into a human world, centralize the most challenging character they could from a writing perspective, and have the most visually daunting character carry her around. They must have thought the payoff would be worth all that work, because if there's any character from the Pixar wheelhouse who best represents their studio, if we had to switch out the lamp and the Luxo ball as the icons for Pixar for anybody, it should probably be Dory. In how her life outlook and optimism, her unstoppable cheer and charm, her courage, her flashy, colourful, instantly recognisable design that sort of half cartoonifies something photoreal, is contrasted with a deeply emotional backstory and something of an affinity for platitudes, self-doubt, and a somewhat tragic bent. I think what makes Dory Dory really cuts to the heart of what Pixar can so often achieve within their movies themselves, whether that's flattering or not. Just Keep Swimming, coming from the mouth of Dory, a regal blue tang who suffers from short-term memory loss, quite simply embodies the whole of Pixar as well as any of their characters could. She's the closest they have to a Pikachu. Finding Dory allows a space for that character and that identity to really rise to the center, for what she's represented to take all the focus in all the tropey shortcomings as well as the plain-faced joy. This is a character I feel it's really worth having another movie about, and doubtless her popularity on top of the original film's legacy is what contributed to this film's enormous commercial success, but I just also feel there's no reason to not want this movie, and I think they did a really great job bringing Dory to the forefront, because it's just such a celebration, I think, of a lot of what Pixar can succeed at but also fail at. There's something about this movie, I think, and all the conflict and all the missing pieces that really speaks to Pixar to me. I enjoy how the film seems to fully embrace Dory's energy, and we meet several other characters who share her outlook and disposition quite quickly. It seems obvious to say, but the movie revolves around her like a satellite in orbit. Most characters are written around her, it feels, to respond to her and contrast with her effectively. As a piece of education on how to fill out a written scene with characters who complement each other well, Finding Dory is as good an example as any. When you have a character like her in the middle of the frame, when your protagonist is as compelling and multifaceted as her, surrounding her with other characters becomes a matter of how is this character unlike Dory? Hank is grumpy because she's chipper, and that dynamic fills out their scenes. When Destiny is chipper, that fills in that hole, and it gives space for Dory to be a little bit more reserved and fearful. When Destiny is fearful, Bailey reassures her to give her courage. Like always, Dory is determined when Marlin is worrisome. Nemo is encouraging when Marlin is cautious. Every scene makes sure to balance those extreme sides of the scale so every character feels individual and complements the rest of the cast really well. It helps the dialogue really pop, and when character division is such a force for plot and tension, it makes the final act, when everybody is on the same page, feel really earned and cathartic. Dory is really constantly battling to stay resilient, to keep hold of the determined parts of herself, and while it makes way for the film to at times basically remove her memory condition or make it feel less debilitating than it should be, there's a sense that the whole movie is there to validate her and reinforce the value of not just her disability but her personality, her choices, and works very hard to show her arc in both subtle and clear ways that mean she eventually gets to feel at peace with her whole self. Like, she's finding Dory. She herself is trying to find who Dory is. That's where the title of the movie comes from. She consistently defaults to being the sidekick early in the movie, allowing other people to take the lead and not really speaking up. But as the film goes on, she begins making more and more of her own decisions and trusting her instincts, eventually insisting on being listened to. This subtle arc is carried by her obvious yearning for belonging and acceptance that she felt with her parents not really being a sense that she feels anywhere else. She's looking for someone to tell her that she is able to do things and achieve things, and the tilt shift effect on her flashbacks gives this sense of a cherished, special time in her life. And when we see her with Marlin at the Great Barrier Reef and like being annoying to all those people, but it's because they're choosing to be annoyed rather than responding the way her parents do, of like, no, that's fine, let's encourage her and help her belong and be inclusive. And that I'm sick of using the word contrast, but that the difference there is very effectively sort of conveyed. And since the message the film seems to be conveying is all about trust, whether of yourself or the people around you, Dory being able to drive her own story at the same time as learning when she does need help, I think is very well balanced. Marlin eventually learns that she knows how to make her own decisions, isn't entirely dependent on anyone, and Dory learns that just because she has trouble sometimes doesn't mean she's useless or unlovable, or make her incapable of achieving things by herself. She does succeed at doing what she sets out to do, even if she has some different ways of going about it or more difficulty than other people. I think this story of this movie is really beautiful, a story very much worth telling and very much worth taking the time to consume and think over, to speak to the difficulty of making peace with your illnesses and trusting yourself and valuing yourself regardless of how they can dominate your life, and on the responsibility of those around you to allow you in the space. The need to give time, trust, and respect to everybody in the space regardless of what's going on with them is an incredibly worthwhile narrative. It might just take more time and more consideration, but trying to force someone to fit into your little mold or rejecting them if they don't, I think Dory does a great job sort of highlighting that issue within a society. It might be tropey at times, absolutely, in the details of analyzing the disabilities a fish has doesn't translate one-to-one to the real world, but just how Finding Nemo conveyed a rather serious message from a distinctly adult area of tension about losing your child, Finding Dory speaks to meaty discussions and does so while taking on some of the most enormous visual tasks that Pixar had ever faced at this point. This film looks incredible. Simply, this movie looks amazing. The colors, the updates on lenses, the complexity in the shooting, the blue, just mwah. How many types of blue are there? They're in this movie. Water simulation, tentacle simulation. It's likely you've already heard, because I already said it, how Hank the Octopus was by far the most complicated character the studio had ever animated, but it's worth reiterating the task. Reportedly, Hank the Octopus took around 2.5 years to finalize ready for production after sculpting, rigging, and design, when typically a main character takes about 6 to 9 months. That's just getting him ready to be animated, not even animating him yet. He had around 4,000 2,000 animation control points as opposed to around 700 for someone like Woody, a character based on a humanoid skeleton. And this is even after Hank's 8th arm was actually removed. Technically, he's only got 7 because you can't fit 8 on there, but you never see all of them at once, and who's counting? But each of the remaining arms still has a bunch of suckers on it, and since he's entering and leaving water a bunch throughout the movie, his paws react to the changes in the air. You have to show him dry and wet, and in the process of drying, simulate water falling from him as he leaves the body of the stuff, or splash underwater when he re-enters, as well as him moving properly above water and underwater. It's so much work and it looks so good. His rig was actually so detailed that it was repurposed for the big tentacle creature things in the Star Wars The Force Awakens. And while he moves underwater like anyone else, it's worth, just like the challenge of physical contact in Cars, drawing more attention to how gravity and force influences animation changes in characters above and below water. For Hank, conveying his speed underwater is different than when he's on land, different again when he's hanging from things. What's his center of gravity in all of those situations? How is it dangling, or how is it above his legs? And animating characters underwater inherently involves more space, because the water around them is something they're moving through. There's no direct lines to a destination, you weave in and out of a current. A fish is constantly moving to give an impression of them being in a body of water, but just like with the cars being above the ground, the fish here are just floating in the air. They're just animated to trick the eye into thinking that isn't the case. At all times, a fish or a sea creature must be behaving physically in a way the audience understands to imply the unseen force of water on their bodies in a way we accept as natural. It's not even something you actively look for. This is almost animation at a subconscious level. There's never a moment of stillness underwater. The fish is always moving, the water around them is always doing something that they need to respond to, and the animators need to maintain the illusion that the audience buys into, that they're not just floating on the screen, that they're in a body of water. And while animating characters inside water is one thing, looking at bodies of water from above is another, especially when there's so much glass and other reflective stuff going on here as well. How light moves through the air, then hits the water, goes through the water, how the surface tension sort of refracts all that light, how it then bounces off the glass and goes through the other side of the tank, informs the coloration of all this shit. This kettle thing that Dory is inside on the pram, how it being a round capsule warps her dimensions when you're looking at her from the outside. Finding Nemo had very, very few shots where the camera went from being above the water to submerging in the same moment, but this one shot of a first-person view of Dory falling through pipes and out into the ocean is seamless, and the following several minutes of gloriously controlled shot-by-shot lighting direction is enrapturing. From my perspective though, I do think the visuals of this film are noticeably more enjoyable once you're spending time inside the Marine Life Institute. It's a bit of a problem I have more so with Nemo, but fish are little guys, and the cinematography of Nemo can often be, in my opinion, just way too close to any given character and lose out on a sense of size quite seriously. It makes them look huge, especially when there aren't ordinary objects around them to give me a sense of scale, and the design of the animals is walking on the same curious line of Cars as being kind of half photoreal. The animals are based on real creatures, but they've got faces and teeth and human eyes, and it kind of distorts their size. I get that it's shot from like a fish's point of view, and at times that's great when out in the big sea, but the stuff inside the tank with Nemo just always feels too big to me. While at the reef in Finding Dory, the cast is surrounded by colourful coral and stuff and other fish, but I got no fucking clue how big a coral is. I don't know how big a stingray is. I got no memory or real life scale reference for that kind of stuff. Most audiences don't. But when they're inside the Institute, everybody know how big a door is, so then seeing Dory in size relative to how big a common object is makes the scale of the film much easier to understand, and the photography I think therefore much more compelling. The difference it makes is particularly emphasized in the fantastic touch pool sequence. It has some vibes of like Sunnyside Daycare in Toy Story 3, and reiterating the size of fish in relation to humans or even just to the world around them, I think inherently makes the film feel better atmospherically. This moment is equal parts frenetic, energetic, frightening, and very funny. Pixar really do excel at little characters in big worlds. It's a feeling they're very good at. that. It's all of their first feature and a lot of their movies since, and it's something that I feel both Nemo movies don't always succeed at, but Dory is definitely the stronger of the two in this area. On the whole, I don't find this movie as entrancing as Nemo from like an atmospheric point of view, but I think that has more to do with the music, because I think the photography in Finding Dory is no contest, just much stronger. These characters are physically quite small, and it feels better when that's being emphasized. The framing underwater, I feel, is consistently stronger when the characters look smaller in the frame, but that can also be achieved by decorating the set well. The sea lion interaction has like those yellow leaves on the surface of the water, helping everything look much more full and offering a sense of actual scale between the animals. On a technical level, this film is a joy to interpret and be intellectually engaged with. The minutiae of animation doesn't matter to everybody. I'm sure I'm boring a lot of people right now, but I'm glad to have been taking the time to learn a little bit more about how this type of movie is made, because it means I can enjoy movies like this for more reasons. I said in a video a couple of years ago, I wanted to expand the language that I had about animation, and being able to look at films like Finding Dory through more avenues is why that's a valuable pursuit to me. Now, the things that aren't great about Finding Dory are numerous and well documented, and come to light most clearly when I think placed next to its forefather. Putting the two movies next to each other isn't strictly speaking going to expose flaws, just differences. And while Dory is different from Nemo in some areas, I'm not usually one to say those things deserve to be held against it just because they're different. It's a departure, especially given the time differential, doesn't mean it's doing anything wrong, but it can still help to find the areas where some people just might find Dory a bit less compelling than Nemo. Finding Nemo is, as I'll go on to speak about in the next section, a film which is still remarkably potent in the feelings of awe and wonder that it inspires for very specific reasons, I feel. And as for its legacy, really was the movie which ushered Pixar into the height of their early success, and that's very difficult to compete with or stand next to. After Finding Nemo, the run of the next few films, I think at least I remember being Pixar at their cultural peak. For Finding Nemo, its defining trait has a lot to do with, I think, the core difference that people can see between original Pixar and modern Pixar, and it's actually the film's relationship with danger. I've been going on a lot about this in other movie reviews, but I think it really is the central thing for Pixar, like danger, how their movies are made in response to it, how they employ it, whether they acknowledge it, and how it just danger and fear. It's the real thing at the very center of the trouble that I think I have with a lot of their movies. But to keep it focused here, a lot of the differences I think between Dory and Nemo, and with danger in mind, therefore has to do with tone. Dory doesn't feel nearly as mysterious, nearly as dangerous, especially in its final act, and it leans into that cartoonishness with an octopus driving a truck. And it took me a minute to figure out why that just doesn't feel quite right, why it's almost like a jumping the shark moment. I mean, Toy Story 2 had a very, very similar set piece and it works great there. And I happen to think the Sigourney Weaver joke during that moment and running through the whole movie might have been the hardest I'd laughed at a Pixar movie in quite some time when I'd first heard it. But it just feels strange because it's not in keeping tonally with how dangerous and fragile things felt in Nemo. You would not in a million years have seen a fish driving a truck in that movie, what with its "our grand plan is a plastic bag" subplot. Dory does away with the feeling of more realistic fragility and danger which haunted the characters basically every second of the original movie, and some viewers just may not find that it results in as enchanting a world. It's a choice which even I don't always love. The spirit of the world in this movie just doesn't quite feel cohesive. It's not as much a sequel in feeling. Pixar used to threaten their protagonists with consequences, I feel, much more fully than they do now, and that change is clearest between these two movies. Danger was such a theme of that first movie that it's almost the platform from which it speaks. How different people react to danger was its very mouthpiece, and that change in appeal is something that Dory never really feels at ease with. Don't get me wrong, I really like this movie, and I find the middle third of it quite stressful when Dory's on her own, navigating the pipes and getting lost in the kelp forest, but evicting the more grim tint that the opening scene alone gives to Finding Nemo means this movie just doesn't feel the same way. Dory feels like a movie, Nemo feels like a story. Where the humor of Nemo felt like it broke through that otherwise extreme set of circumstances, the jokes of Dory are honestly harder to see given that tonal shift. I mean, the seagulls with their whole thing was like, it's funny, but it's still scary. They're talking about eating you. In Dory, that feeling has kind of been switched. The sad and the darker moments break through a lighter tone, in the way the jokes broke through a darker tone. I think that's the result of focusing on Dory as the central character, an optimist, more than Marlin, a pessimist. optimist, which I think is a conscious choice on part of the filmmakers. Each film's tone reflects the disposition of either Marlin or Dory, and putting a pessimistic filmic lens onto a character who doesn't see the world that way could potentially have just felt even worse or compound into something even more needlessly dour than Finding Nemo can occasionally be. If Dory had been the central character of Nemo, it's likely that movie would have felt a lot less dangerous too, since she's usually having fun in all those moments, and we're called to identify more with Marlin, and that's where our fear comes from. We identify with his reaction to those events, but Dory is doing like, escape! And that sense of optimism is what Finding Dory as a film feels much more aligned with. And while both do have their merits, you're still permitted to your preference. If the lightness in combination with the frenetic energy of Dory means the movie blurs along and washes over you and you can't get a foothold in it, I think that'd be a pretty common takeaway. Nemo as a movie was very sad a lot of the time, and it meant those light moments, which was Dory's function throughout a lot of it, were really easy to hold on to. And there's a lot of plot conveniences going on to make Finding Dory happen, and as a whole movie, it does, I think, take a few sittings to adjust to, but it's engaging to me in a way that Pixar's work very, very rarely is. They struggled with this one. I'm well aware of why. Dory is not the most popular of Pixar sequels, but I come at this from a standpoint of admiration. I enjoy how it sits within Pixar's catalog as an open, easy example of them taking a bunch of active risks, of having a world of easy options at their feet. Let's just go see Bruce again, let's do something with him. Let's keep Nemo, let's do a teenage Nemo. How would that work? They had a whole bunch of stuff they could have done, and they chose one of the most difficult places they could go. As a whole, their films can feel effortless, like I said, and sometimes that refinement goes too far. If you're constantly sanding down a story until it's always easy to follow and to consume, you end up with conventional, middle-of-the-road works that don't surprise anybody. But Finding Dory, I think, is surprising to me. It's surprising to watch the movie feel like it really struggles to get where it's going because it's not being conventional. It's walking up to challenges of a story about disability, accessibility, trust, and relationships with people with illnesses and people who have them, either self-view or your friends and partners, how to create an ambitious world setting and occupy it with a set of immensely challenging visual roadblocks and say that it's worth it. Not every Pixar movie just has the stones that Finding Dory does. I enjoy the failures that the movie powers through because it helps Pixar look, for once, like a bruised, noble soldier panting at the finish line. Maybe it didn't hit every mark. Maybe not every joke landed. Maybe you thought the movie was kind of annoying at times. I really like this movie. For each sequence like the truck that doesn't work, or a character like Bailey the beluga whale that doesn't quite click for me, there's two other things that really do. The reunion moment itself is really earned and wonderful, and the whole build up the preceding 15 minutes are spotless. Again, I love the running Sigourney Weaver gag. I think it's hilarious. I love the investigation of Dory's emotional memory, how she remembers people that she loves and brings people out of their shells. I enjoyed the touch pull sequence and Dory finding her old home quite a lot, and the opening moments of watching Dory slowly grow up is a brief little montage, but really, really well composed. There's a present restraint on fan service that I appreciate also. Once we revisit Crush as a plot device, it's pretty much all new territory. I think that was really cool. I think not only was this movie worth making and is worth seeing because it centralizes Dory and how great a character she is, I think it was bold, I think it's ambitious, it's gutsy, and it's committed to its choices in the face of any writing challenge, visual challenge, and the emotional challenges and pressure presented by this kind of project in the first place. I think that ambition should be acknowledged and rewarded. I like watching this movie because it really feels surprising and risky and like it struggles to get over the line, and maybe not everyone's going to enjoy watching a movie like that, but I respect the hustle of Finding Dory. So in Finding Nemo, a barracuda absolutely wrecks this young family. I don't need to recap the story of Finding Nemo. You have seen Finding Nemo. You know how sometimes someone will go like, I actually haven't seen The Lord of the Rings. And be proud of that for some reason? I actually haven't seen Harry Potter. I've never watched Star Wars. No one in the world has seen this movie called The Godfather. Nobody knows what it is. It's really cool. I haven't seen it personally, but I hear it's good. Well, everybody on the planet has seen Finding Nemo. If I find any comments below going like, no, I actually haven't, you're a liar, and you're not fooling anybody. This is the best-selling DVD of all time. 40 million copies in 3 years. When humans are eradicated from the face of the earth, copies of this movie on physical discs will outlast us all, and every new human child will be gifted a copy at birth. My goodness gracious me, this film packs that nostalgia punch for me. I had this thing committed to memory. I could quote the lines along with the film as it played, and it's very possible, it's guaranteed, it played a significant role in the love I still have of voiceover, which continues to this day. For anybody watching this video who might have been born after 2003 when this film was released, or wasn't yet old enough to remember it, it's really hard to overstate the popularity and the cultural significance of Finding Nemo. Not just to Pixar, but I think to the world of animation at large when it arrived. This thing exploded. It was inescapable. And of Pixar's earliest work, I do think, while of course Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and Bug's Life were significant, Finding Nemo had a reach that seemed to truly transcend anything that came before. It moved above kids animation. It just genuinely felt like it was a movie for everybody, and everybody loved it. In the same year as Return of the King, both Matrix sequels, Ang Lee's Hulk, Kill Bill Volume 1, Pirates of the Caribbean 1, Finding Nemo arrived like a bomb went off. Absolutely no bullshit. Governments all over the world needed to deal with the fact that people were flushing their fish down toilets because of this movie. The rise of popularity of tropical fish meant that people weren't taking care of these regal blue tangs and clownfish that they bought because they didn't know how to salinate their water properly. There was a cut scene that had Nemo go through the sewage treatment plant that would have killed any fish someone actually put in their toilet. The movie, people were killing their fish in their toilets because the movie... It's so sad. Oh, just kill my fish. They just didn't have anything better to do with their time. Oh my god, they were just flushing their fish, and they didn't know that of course they're just gonna die. because there's like treatment shit. Oh my god. People were dumb in 2003. What a parent in their right mind goes home, looks at the goldfish in their bowl, and it's like, yep. They're a little Timmy, we gotta send by the Goldie. Because the movie said all drains lead to the ocean. All drains. That's where they go. Watch a movie, kill a fish. Oh my god. What is wrong with me? Oh, I got the giggles. Jesus Christ, I'm crying. Holy shit. I'm sorry, I've just never laughed that hard on tape. Back to business. Finding Nemo, popular movie. Its focus on the parent-child relationship, but its choice to follow both the kid and the dad in separate stories, and surrounding them both with enigmatic, hilarious, colourful, and very well-cast characters, helped anybody of any age watching it felt spoken to and entertained, and gave them somebody to identify with, learn something from, or hold on to. The film's road trip construction gave it a lot of chances to be memorable. It seemed to reach to genuine film enthusiasts too, and not only help pay the bills for Pixar for a lot of years, but it alone might have been the reason why they got the pick of the litter when it came to collaborators on any future projects. You made Finding Nemo? Yeah, of course I'll work with you. Finding Nemo was their 5th film, and even from then Disney CEO Michael Eisner might have been the first one to face the, yeah, not as good as your old stuff kind of criticism, which may have been fired by Eisner at the film early in development when many things were different, including things as significant as Gil's entire characterization and the man cast as Marlin, but it remains a significant signifier for the film. This film film was set to be their reality check, their first dip in quality, and yet it quickly became their new landmark achievement, their highest grossing film instead, and wouldn't be overtaken at the box office until Toy Story 3 7 years later. Even internally, compared to Brad Bird's The Incredibles, Finding Nemo was not the more attractive of the two films to work on, being developed at the same time, wasn't presumed to be the big dog of the two, and yet it surpassed every expectation. Now, since a lot of what I do on my channel is not just parrot the common talking points about the media that I'm discussing, and since I'm pretty confident most folks know what they think about this particular film already, I feel for Finding Nemo I might accidentally fall victim to thinking a lot of it goes without saying. I'll do my best to highlight the areas that I like most about it, but perhaps that might mean that I miss one or two of the more obvious things. We'll see. What I need to make sure I reiterate is the strength of this film's editing, especially in how it perfectly sets up and delivers on every single joke with precise, natural timing that keeps everything funny these many, many years later. The editing overall is the film's greatest asset to me, but it's also its strongest choice and can be limiting in other ways. Stuff like Marlon losing consciousness happens a few times, like an easy way to transition out of his scenes. For the film to be so rhythmic means that it can lose some things, and we'll talk about it, but what it gains is quite possibly being Pixar's funniest and most quotable movie.
I'm H2O intolerant. I'm obnoxious.
There's nothing to see. Gather over there.
He touched the butt.
He really doesn't mean it. You know, he never even knew his father.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. Are you my conscience?
Whoa!
Light, please. Voila. Voila. I shall call him Squishy, and he shall be mine, and he shall be my Squishy.
So, Mr. Turtle.
Whoa, dude. Mr. Turtle is my father. Name's Crush.
Dad, watch out! Remember, rip it, roll it, and punch it!
It's like he's trying to speak to me. I know it.
Orange and small, and white stripes.
Me. And the next one, just a guess. Me.
Okay, that's just scary. He either said we should go to the back of the throat, or he wants a root beer float.
It's morning, everyone. Today's the day. The sun is shining, the tank is clean, and we are getting out of... The tank is clean. The tank is clean!
Finding Nemo, in retrospect, does feel like a very refined film from that particular year, a near timeless gem of editing, pacing, and story economy against a litany of competition renowned for their runtimes as much as anything. Nemo is about as solid an example as you could provide on how to write exposition well, how to cast a movie well, and how to score a movie well, and how to trim a story of any and all fat. I wonder how many of my complaints or my dissatisfaction with it today is just because it's turning like 20 years old this year, because really at that time in history, I pretty much don't think that anything was worth complaining about with this film. Now, I mentioned when we hit Soul that movie was sort of a benchmark in my rankings. We went from the bottom 4 films that I don't think are really guaranteed to be worth your time to sit down with, to films I think you will get something out of, and I think Finding Nemo is the next benchmark that we're seeing in my ranking. We were talking about movies. Now we're talking about movies. I think I have two favorite aspects of Nemo that probably really helped me connect with it as a young kid. By the time I was watching it again and again and again, I don't know if I'd have said I loved music yet, but I do know that I am an extremely audio and sound driven person. Sound has always interested me. Voice acting was probably my first love, and I do think that the strength of Nemo's sound design probably connected with those parts of me before I even knew that I was inclined toward those things. The sound effects and ambient design, the music editing and placement, the strength of the voice cast and their performances, the triumph of the way this movie sounds is absolutely essential to why it succeeds. So many moments of this film just rely on the strength of the sound design and the editing of the sound that even for a full few moments in a favorite part of this movie from my dad, the film has such confidence in the way that it sounds that it can have an entirely black screen and the movie just keeps going. The adventure or the visuals can, in some other cases for Pixar, be more center stage or be something that I personally focus on more. And Nemo is at times, like the jellyfish forest in the opening of the Great Barrier Reef, still a really great looking movie, but the crowning jewel of this film has got to be how it realized and leaned on the power of sound to do so much of the heavy lifting for it. Really could be the star of the show. This film looks pretty great still, most of the time, but listening to Albert Brooks and Ellen DeGeneres and Willem Dafoe and Alexander Gould and Thomas Newman's score Marlin just brings this thing to life. A lot of it is down to those two main actors who are splendid in these roles. They manage to dish out the comedy in spades in such advanced ways, but deliver on the emotional moments so adeptly as well. Truly top class stuff from Brooks and DeGeneres here, and boy, did Pixar know it. Often the scenes with them will just cut down to the two characters talking with nothing else going on, just like a comedy duo taking a moment in the spotlight. This kind of sparsity is very special and indicates a kind of confidence that is so brazen it edges on cockiness. There's the big exciting set pieces like, oh, the jellyfish, oh, there's a boat, oh, everyone's running around with bombs and stuff that feel like they're there to buy these moments when Dory and Marlin just take a breath and the camera does nothing, and just the comedy and the emotion can shine so brightly. There's barely a barrier between the characters and the audience at all, and the animators can just live it up and make these small moments so dynamic. You really know you've got it in the bag when you're doing shit like this. Holding 4 minutes on basically nothing but two people talking, that just doesn't happen often in Pixar anymore, and it doesn't work unless your two performers are absolutely perfect, experienced comedians with great chemistry and are receiving great direction. Brooks and DeGeneres elevate this already fun material whilst also crafting in many ways career pinnacle performances for both of them. Both of these characters feel so full and compelling very quickly, which is a common thread throughout Nemo given how it writes its characters fairly simply, but nonetheless, it takes really special performers to take material like this and graduate it up to this level. Also, absolutely shining and gleaming is the score for this film. Thomas Newman's music here pulls the entire thing together like a small child being wrapped tenderly in a blanket, being laid down gently in a cot, snoozing like it knows that it's loved. It's gentle, it's warm, it's comforting, but also feels like it imparts such a spirit of restrained gloom to the world of the whole movie. The major themes are used sparingly, but so effectively. The on-screen action synchronizes with the cues and the movement and the stings perfectly. The music is so loud and present, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's as much a character as any on-screen persona here, and since this movie is absolutely rolling from scene to scene so quickly, the music does the hard work of seeming to pull back on the reins and imbue a sense of slowing down that the movie doesn't really do on its own a lot of the time. This is a breakneck movie. There's so much packed in here, but the music is so present and in control that in the audience, the rhythm of the score helps the film feel easy when it needs to, foreboding when it wants to, and exciting when it has to be. Sure, it sounds a lot like Thomas Newman's work on Shawshank Redemption, but it suits the film wonderfully, and the closeness of the relationship between the editing, the music, and the animation allows the music to really come to the forefront with the rest of the sound and the movement, and provides so much depth to the entire picture. The ensemble here in this movie is quite large, and demonstrates to me a clear upgrade from A Bug's Life in terms of how the team have approached writing for these sorts of movies. Simplicity is the key here. It comes at the cost of some depth. I think Nemo is a film that even children could basically understand in its entirety. I'm speaking from experience. Maybe not on the levels that it's playing on subconsciously, or really know the answers why, but if you're a kid, you know what the movie's talking about, I think. And that seems to be a trade-off that the film is very comfortable with, since maybe they learned that giving each individual member of an ensemble too much to do kind of makes the film feel overstuffed and uncohesive and spread out. I just don't know if I'd assume anyone except for Marlin, Dory, and Nemo would be able to carry more than 10 minutes of story by themselves. Nobody else here has much going on, but it feels like that's an approach that's been chosen to give more aerodynamic to the narrative. Crush doesn't need an arc, Marlin does. It's very focused, and it's kind of the opposite of Incredibles 2. This is a story for a movie, and a movie alone. It's clipped almost too close of extra details. Everything is extremely direct. The very second a new character has served their purpose or the joke of them has run dry, the movie moves on, as if with sleight of hand. The thing doesn't look like a weak character or a one-trick pony moment if it's constantly being switched for a new one every scene. Bubbles has one joke. Deb and Flo, nothing going on there, just one joke. What is this guy's name? I don't know it. A lot of it has to do with how the characters personify or subvert certain tropes, like the roles that they fill. And in many cases, their function in the story is minimal, but for their impact on Marlin or in relation to Marlin. In many ways, the whole movie is that one line of, how do you know something bad isn't gonna happen? And Dory responding, I don't. and much of the ensemble is built to reinforce that tension. How the danger exists on its face, but maybe isn't what you expected. Marlon learns that you can never really be sure of safety, and to live in the moment and actually enjoy your life instead of being overprotective and too cautious and missing out on everything requires you to embrace the unexpected, the good with the bad. And the message is conveyed effectively with a healthy side dish of the tension of a parent-child relationship with humanism and idolatry or discipline and belief and whatever else you want to find here. The directness and constant movement from set piece to set piece and these characters that only serve like their one function before you move on to create new things means the film can feel a bit like a tour or a checklist at times, although it handles this approach doubtlessly with much more grace than many other Pixar entries, which also adopted this approach later on. Monsters U kind of does it with the scare games. Soul very much has the same feeling of going down a list of topics to me, and Inside Out also, like what's the next psychological concept on this list that we can talk about type deal. Finding Nemo has a very organic feeling to it as a movie, which might imply that it's an easy formula to copy or nail, but for Pixar, I think that road trip checklist thing has become a bit of a habit that they should stray from more often than they do, and means that Finding Nemo as a whole movie now feels far less unique in their lineup than it used to. The checklist construction doesn't inhibit the character arcs, thankfully, but it does get in the way of the film properly signposting or building to a real sense of tension as a whole film. There's no clear climax because it has many climaxes in every scene. The stakes feel pretty high for the movie the whole time, so while each individual scene works within itself, the film to me feels like it needs to deliberately work to give the whole 90 minutes the rise and fall. The premise alone kind of paints you into a bit of a corner with this. Making such a high tension plot from the beginning means that Marlon's role as a parent, I mean, his kid is gone. He's gonna be at a 10 out of 10 from the moment that happens, and there's kind of nowhere else to go from there. That's the worst thing that can happen, and it happens instantly. There's no threat of something worse happening because the worst thing has already kind of happened. He's very high strung already, and while he more than shows various moods, there's very little reason for him to ever really be calm or thinking further ahead than the immediate moment. So the film itself feels very focused on the immediate moments too. You've got the end goal of getting Nemo and Marlon back together, but the plot itself has a very short-sighted trajectory. This is mediated slightly by the tank gang's "we're going to escape" plan, which, because it truly doesn't go anywhere, a lot of those scenes are, I think, the only thing giving an audience any idea of what to expect or something at all to anticipate within the plot, and is essentially wrapped up the second that Marlon is physically close enough to serve this function himself. It needs to play certain moments like the fishing grounds or the happy ending moment, but not all of it to me feels necessarily built up to, it just feels needed. It arrives in the moment like everything else does. None of this is discussion of flaws, just so we're clear. Finding Nemo is so beautifully able to keep me focused on the now, as it were, which as a reinforcement to its message is probably quite poetic. It does a fantastic job of working the character arcs into a film which is, behind the curtain, a very simple story with no real villain, no real major twists or turns. Dad loses son, goes looking for son, finds son, goes home, makes some friends along the way, the end. So my hangups with this film feel like choices rather than mistakes, honestly. I love the editing and the pace of this movie most of the time, but it can feel extremely neat in a way I think toward the end starts emphasizing the wrong things. Dory begging Marlon to stay is such an emotive scene that kinda comes out of nowhere and honestly feels a bit excessive in retrospect, especially in comparison to when Nemo and Marlon actually find each other again. This thing we've been waiting to see is barely given any time or emphasis in the moment at all. Dory just begging Marlon is just a bit overdone, I think. And since the film has been so good at rolling through its moments one by one, when bigger things do start happening toward the end, the only reason they feel climactic is because the film digs itself into the saddest little holes it can find to boost the relief. The build is lacking, so the amount of moments where Marlon or Dory just get so desperate are kind of thrown in there to make up the difference, I think. It's kind of a cynical way to look at it, but I do sort of feel that. Dory does need a big character moment toward the end of the film. I agree with that, but it coming from her desperation and not her finding Nemo on her own was maybe the wrong call. And Marlon and Nemo's actual first reunion is immediately overshadowed by a good and necessary sequence, but still itself could have been more memorable, and Bruce showing up at the end of the reef is just positively stupid. But whatever. Now for my more major issue. Most of the cast only have like 1 or 2 quirks to them, which they provide in the 9 or 10 lines they each get, like I mentioned. While Cars has a similar approach to stereotype, it's not a film quite asking to be engaged with emotionally on the same level as this one. As funny as it can be, I don't know if Finding Nemo is a comedy first, and something about the stereotype without depth here to me can occasionally feel a little cheap. Of course there are exceptions, and the strength of the voice cast does very well, but where I in particular gripe most strongly with this is that the stereotype doesn't just extend to the ensemble, but basically the entirety of the Australia setting. Here is some live footage of me reacting to every time I see the same Australian stereotype jokes at least 3 times a day whenever I go online. Oh my God.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Now, I can't speak to how consistently this might be a problem within Pixar's larger work. They've set films in places other than America, like in France and Canada and Mexico and Italy and some parts in Japan, and informed those films with what feels like the general culture of those places. But I certainly wouldn't be able to fault anyone from those places maybe not loving these movies based on how stereotypically the way Finding Nemo portrays Australia. I don't find it offensive or anything, but of late with the rise of Aussie stereotypes, and that's pronounced Aussie, not Aussie, you weirdos, I've noticed this kind of no joke kind of going around online in the last few years. I'm now kind of seeing that Finding Nemo is just one in a long line of cheap jokes at the expense of any kind of depth that Australia might have to offer a story, in favour of easy signifiers, bit casting, and making sure everybody says mate and g'day 9 times a minute. It's just becoming a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I find it a bit more frustrating every year. Aussie stereotype, internationally speaking, seems to start at like Crocodile Dundee and end with Steve Irwin, who are both great, but you know, we have more to us than this. I should probably just do a whole video about this separately, honestly. It's not like I find Finding Nemo hugely offensive as an Aussie or something, but I know that I don't find the setting substantive or authentic at all. It doesn't feel like, because I've lived in this country, that I get a better understanding of the movie on basically any level, in the same way that Mexicans might for Coco or New Yorkers might for Soul. I don't have an issue with it being set in Australia, the jokes are certainly fine, but there is a slight difference somewhere along the line here. I'm not above stereotypical jokes myself. I mean, I did it with my god-awful Scottish accent for the Brave section. I mean, I have my off days, I'm sorry. But there's something missing to balance out that easy route here when most of the time Finding Nemo is genuinely asking for emotional investment. I'd be absolutely fine with it making stupid Aussie jokes that are blatantly stereotypical if it feels like it's coming from a place of admiration or authenticity. I'm as big a fan of Arnie Donner as anybody, and that's half their whole shtick, but the Aussie slang feels like it doesn't pay its dues here to get access to the club. All of it is humor at the expense of or trading on the novelty of, ooh, Aussies, not genuinely placing the story within our cultural mindset or allowing our distinct brand of humor to come to the surface. It's Australian jokes that Americans find funny, and we don't have to wonder why that is, because it was made by a bunch of Americans who didn't give a shit. I know it's not only as a result of movies like Finding Nemo thinking, oh, the opera house, putting that on the screen means anything to anyone, but my tolerance on this kind of shortchanging gets shorter every year, and I just want to note this. I don't know how like French people feel about Ratatouille, but I do think that it shows a multifaceted nature to France and Paris that's not the equivalent of, oh look, there's a tower there. The film was set in Paris, at least it feels like to me as an international person, because it's a city synonymous with food and romance, and the country of France routinely sees transgressive and ground-shaking art production every year, which is what that movie is about. Finding Nemo was set in the Great Barrier Reef and Sydney, but I don't think any of the major players in the team at Pixar visited Australia until the press tour for this film's promotion and its shows. It's just becoming a pet peeve of mine to see Australian stereotype not even advance beyond where it was before I was born. Shrimp on the Barbie, dangerous animals, weird, thick comedy accents. It's gentle, but I think Finding Nemo could have done way, way better on this front. It's something that annoys me particularly and probably doesn't matter to most people, but compared to the level of research put into sea life and fish, to put what feels like the bare minimum into the Australia setting is a real letdown, and barely compares to their later projects set elsewhere in the world, even though there are probably still problems and generalities in all the rest too. We just have to dial this up because, I mean, God forbid Australia just be a place where the story is. We can't have that, nor. I mean, I guess this was only their 5th movie and was the first one that was definitely not set in America, but they just clearly had no faith that anyone would want to see a movie based in Australia actually using a majority of Australian actors. Let me put it this way. If you went to get your teeth checked in like Loxton or Broome or Wollongong circa 1990, you could reasonably expect that your dentist would be all like, "Little Davy Reynolds!
Marge, when's my next appointment tomorrow?"
Well, Mr. Tucker, well that sets up, I gotta go see a man about a wallaby. I would kinda get it if you said it in the right place.
But no! Highly trained medical professional operating in Sydney on the most expensive real estate in the country, literally on Sydney Harbour, talks like this. He doesn't once complain about the noise from local concert halls or do a single line of coke. It's an accurate representation of Sydney cider culture, and I won't stand for it.
Just do better, alright, mate? Cheers. Moving on. Putting aside the human designs, which leave a little bit to be desired in my opinion, as I mentioned in my Dory section, I don't always love the way this movie is shot. There's some great moments and tricks like the David Fincher-esque escape sequence montage. The stuff inside the whale is really great, and the sense of speed can occasionally be strong too. The jellyfish forest again is probably visually the highlight of the movie, and the anglerfish sequence playing with the light and dark is again very, very unique. It's the stuff in the tank that I just don't know if it manages to pull off. I think I remember something about Pixar at this period of time were very conscious in their cinematography of the kinds of screens they were making movies for now that home video was a very big thing. But televisions were in that strange halfway world between the old school square CRTs and widescreen. It wasn't like you could pop down to your local post office and grab a rectangle LCD for $50. Your family maybe had an older square unit from the 90s still running on tubes, and the widescreen or LCD plasma televisions were still kind of rare and expensive luxury items, especially for poorer countries. I think it might be a bit of an overlooked aspect of actual filmmaking form across all sorts of movies being produced from the mid to late 90s until maybe 2007-ish, and certainly informs the difference you can see between films and television shows productions at that time. Cinematography was in this transitional period. Home video and television was an enormous market that demanded consideration, and for Pixar or Disney, television replays, be it on cable or network or their own channels, was also happening. So when you made your movie, you had to have it in mind that your film would be played in a cinema on a big widescreen, but might also be on a square TV that a lot of people still had with or without letterboxing. And if you spend more than 8 seconds assessing the cinematography of Finding Nemo through that lens, I think some things immediately start making sense. How close do you want to get to all these fishy faces, huh? How about this close? This close enough? How wide you want that lens? You want that bigger than the state of Kansas? I can do that for you. The shooting inside the tank in particular always felt confusing and a way too big for me. And a way too big. It's got to be a simple fish tank, but I just don't have good recall of its geography from like the top down, the way I do somewhere like the Parr family home or Andy's bedroom. It uses these very, very wide lenses and these big close angles to give it a feeling of it being this huge place with a bunch of different places to go and hide, often with only 1 or 2 fish in the frame at any time, when really it's a fish tank with like a half dozen fish in there. It doesn't feel nearly as cramped as it should. I would like to have felt more trapped within those sequences, even if only to make the escape plan plot seem more interesting for the other characters. They all want to leave the tank, and while I get Nemo's desire for that, it's kind of just a given for the rest of them, and if the shooting and environment of the tank had been less hospitable, more cramped, I think that problem kind of solves itself. However, and to loop back around from the many notes that I've been giving to the things I love about this movie, because I do love this movie, my favorite moment in Finding Nemo does occur inside the tank. I think these days my favorite aspect of Finding Nemo, and probably one of the deepest reasons that I gravitated toward it so strongly as a kid, has to do with the window that kids have into the themes of its parent-child relationship. I'll let you know when it fully happens, but the closest I've come to crying on these rewatches so far was in this scene right here. The one where Nigel is telling Nemo the lengths that his dad is going to find him. That totally unexpected but so deeply longed for moment of pure admiration that Nemo has for his father, hearing firsthand how loved he is when he never knew he was worth all that. The vocal just fades into the background. It's such a natural, pure moment that somehow plucks, as if from thin air, that feeling of a deep-seated fantasy that maybe every young kid has. To steal a line almost directly from Lee Unkrich, co-director, that he just I think he said in the commentary that just so perfectly sums this up. On some level, every young kid wants their dad to be Superman. And if every kid has Superman for a dad, why would they aspire to any less? How Finding Nemo speaks to the very deep, almost fully natural and unbidden and unspoken desire between kids and parents for each of their best selves. It speaks to something that at least I can't help feeling. I am a very family-orientated guy, so is my dad. I don't have to wonder where I got that from. And to be honest, while I often struggle with the concepts of masculinity, which are constantly changing and being challenged not just internally but by society as a whole, the ideals of fatherhood and of being a good son to my dad is truly one of the most grounding aspects of my identity that I maybe have in my whole life. I don't really know what it means to be a good man. I don't know what that is. That's so weird and dicey and foreign to me. But if I think of it through the lens of being a good son, that's something I can figure out. I want to be a good son. I want my dad to be a good dad. I know he wants to be a good dad, and he wanted to be a good son for his dad too. And we're both taking turns learning from each other even now. We go back and forth on what we learn every year, like we're standing in a line of very flawed men, all far too angry, all far too closed off. And for some reason, the idea of this little fish being inspired by his dad, who was inspired by his own son to go further than they each could on their own, that just really gets me. That just really gets me. Fathers have that responsibility to their sons and their children to model behavior of good men in the world. And as much as I believe heroes do come in all forms, my first hero was probably my dad. Of course he wasn't perfect, but just as kids idealize the behavior of their parents, learn from them, I think a good parent in time comes to learn from their child. And I know now more than ever that my dad and I are still teaching each other things, as a dad and his kid, as two men in the world who know that that work is never done. And I think if Finding Nemo understands anything, it understands it very well. It's on how valuable that connection is to both people, and how important it is to recognize it, to nurture it, and cherish it for as long as you possibly can. A son always wants his dad to be the best that he can be. A dad always wants his son to be there with him. Neither of them are going to get their way. You just have to do the best you can. I'm not a dad. I don't know if I want to be. I don't know if I'll get to be. But I'm surrounded by a lot of them. Three of them are three of the best men I know. One of them is my dad. I'm very grateful to have a great relationship with him. He's the most reliable, dependable, solid man that I know. He's always there when I need him, always. He's very supportive of what I do and what I make and who I am, and I think I admire him most as an adult for the same things that Nemo learns to value in Marlin. His capacity to learn, to listen, to change, and to continue growing no matter how much life he's already seen, and to go to the ends of the earth for those who he cares about. I pray that ability is something that I carry onward as a son and continue to value in my dad until the very, very end. Pixar do make films that adults and children alike can enjoy, and enjoy together. And I today cultivate a space to be able to enjoy those movies basically on my own, because I fell in love with films and music and art at a very early age, and that space is so important to me. I'm making a series now about Pixar movies as an adult, but when I think back to who was watching them with me when I first saw them, taking me to the cinema, sometimes in a group of my friends, sometimes with the whole family, a couple of times, just me and him. It was always my dad. He and I enjoyed these movies together. We still enjoy movies together. And we get new things out of them all the time. And he was there with me at the first steps which saw me find the interest in storytelling. So it's nice to know that one of the earliest films that I remember connecting with would have registered with me because of that. And I would watch this thing over and over again. I don't think Finding Nemo fully encompasses the relationship that I have with my dad. How could it? But it did get pretty much the most important bit. I love this movie.
Oh, Mr. A, wait, I forgot something. Love you, Dad.
You too, pal. Okay.
I love you too, son.
Dad, you can let go now.
Sorry. Now go have an adventure.
Hey folks, thank you so much for watching another episode of Pixar Quality. This one's very long. I didn't expect any of the videos in this series to be more than an hour, but they're getting longer the more and more things I have to say about these movies. I really hope you are enjoying this series. It's something that I'm really enjoying working on. Please let me know what you think of these films. I really enjoy reading what you got from them as well, because these are so personal to so many people. Hit the subscribe if you want to see the next couple of episodes. We're at the halfway point now. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.